Once upon a time, motorways in Britain were new and exciting.
Speed, speed. That was the excitement, really, of what the motorway brought to driving.
And driving in Britain was never going to be the same again.
This driver is just about to commit one of the deadly sins of the motorway. 3 cars and 1 lorry in peril, and all because one driver forgot one simple rule.
Turn on to this shimmering new road, this great yellow brick road leading to a kind of New Jerusalem.
Today, there are 2,211 miles of motorway in Britain. We take them for granted. It's hard to imagine life without them.
The joys of the open road.
But just 50 years ago, there were no motorways in this country.
Ever tried to pass one of these chaps on a narrow road?
And far from idyllic country lanes, Britain's post-war roads were jammed. Our city centres were grinding to a halt.
It was wretched and miserable, and imagine the road stank of petrol. The cars were very leaky at the time, and they belched out a lot of oil with their exhaust too. Hot, oily, smelly, petrol-y world, desperately slow. So things weren't really very romantic in terms of driving in the 1950s.
For years, Britain has been handicapped by a road system geared to a bygone age, with traffic jammed at times to a standstill on roads that were never made to take so many family cars.
Main roads were desperately slow. They really were like clogged arteries. And what the motorways promised, I suppose, was a kind of open-heart surgery on the road system.
There had been motorways in Europe for 30 years. The first one in the world was built in Italy in 1924, followed by Germany in 1929.
The big difference between Germany, Italy and Great Britain in terms of building motorways was, of course, before the war, they had fascism and Nazism. They had totalitarian states there. Think of Mussolini. Mussolini was a man always in a hurry. He liked to be filmed boxing, running, jumping about, doing weights, driving his big Alfa Romeo sports cars. He was always being filmed in a hurry, and he loved that notion of speed. And that was something he was able to impose on Italy. He was always going to run on Rome, march on Rome, speed along, and the motorways came with that philosophy. Hitler, of course, exactly the same, I mean, different sort of character. Hitler said, "Wir haben die Autobahnen!" Junk! As the Autobahnen, strangely enough, were built. No option.
But in Britain, the slow pace of Whitehall bureaucracy held back any plans we may have had to build motorways, and then the war put a stop to them altogether. Peacetime brought more pressing issues for the new Labour government, with new homes and schools to build, and a national health service to create.
This leaflet is coming through your letterbox one day soon.
Before motorways could be built, the Special Roads Act had to be passed in 1949. But even then, construction was hampered by rationing. It wasn't until the mid-50s that the first motorway in Britain was built. Rather than the M1, it was the Preston Bypass, later known as the M6. Preston's infamous gridlock had been causing major delays and holding up trade to Scotland. But getting the go-ahead from Whitehall was due to the efforts of one man, Sir James Drake, the county surveyor for Lancashire.
He was constantly down here in Whitehall, and he was a sturdy little bloke, and he argued fiercely, and sometimes so fiercely that they wished he would go away, which wasn't very helpful to his own cause, because he's that sort of chap. A bit acerbic, if you like, but he was an enthusiast.
He did bully the ministry, and thank goodness he did. It's to his credit, because we might not have even got any motorways yet if he hadn't have been so dogmatic and what have you. But he was a bully.
Originally planned as 8 miles of dual carriageway, work began on the Preston Bypass in 1956.
I remember that there was a sort of a lovely feeling about walking out early in the morning on over these fields that were covered with dew, and you looked at the grass and you thought, well, this is just fantastic. How lucky I am to be having a job like this. Of course, one couldn't get away from the fact that all too soon it was going to be ripped up with big machines, and it would never be green grass again in that particular bit.
8 miles long, it will be the first motorway to be built in Britain. The traffic signal gives the all clear, and without delay, a bulldozer goes ahead regardless of anything on its route. It's followed by a series of robot road makers.
A fleet of machines were brought in to excavate the ground and level it. Britain's first motorway, the Preston Bypass, was built through some of the wettest weather of the 1950s. It was opened to much press attention on the 5th of December 1958 by the Conservative Prime Minister Harold Macmillan.
Today we are celebrating this country's first motorway.
There were lots and lots of people wanting to get onto it. The moment it was open, I want to be on it. And I was right at the front of the little bit of slip road by the barrier, and the official sort of cortege went past with all the VIPs and so on. And the chap who was sitting next to me said, come on, you get going now, come on. So off we went. So I sort of claimed that I was the first person to drive on the motorway. I don't know whether that's true or not.
Here is Britain's first motorway.
In those days, 8 miles was quite a long way, and it took a little while, so it was a big thing. I've driven up the Preston Bypass.
Motor roads which will be confined to high-speed motor traffic with drivers...
The traffic was queuing up to come and try the motorway out. Only people wanted to participate in driving the motorway on the first day, I suppose, just so that they could tell the children. I went on the motorway on the first day.
This is what it feels like at 500 miles an hour.
There was no speed limit at all. Speed. That was the excitement, really, of what the motorway brought to driving.
Here's our cameraman's impression of motorway motion. Just a little bit exaggerated, we admit, but it gives you the idea.
There was a sort of sense of euphoria. I remember we went with my father to drive on the Preston Bypass, as it was, the very first weekend it was opened, and it was an incredible experience. He didn't know how to do it very well, but he got around because there weren't many cars.
I had a Ford Zephyr, and I remember doing the complete run, end to end, and roundabouts included, at an average speed of 83 miles an hour, and I thought that was pretty spectacular. 83 miles an hour was pretty spectacular in those days.
What was so good about early motorway driving was that the motorways were empty. Miles ahead, you couldn't see a car on some occasions, or a lorry, or anything. And so there was a feeling of tremendous sort of excitement.
Here's a family taking their first run down a motorway. They've heard a lot about these new roads where there are no sharp corners, no hills, and no traffic jams, and they're content to saunter along in the sunshine, enjoying themselves.
There was no speed limit and no crash barriers between the carriageways.
The government were concerned about how people might behave on the motorway. So they thought, you know, how will people behave? Will they know how to drive on a multi-lane road? Will they know how to use junctions? Will they know how to join and leave the motorway? Will they know that they're not allowed to stop? So there was great thought among civil servants about how to educate and govern the conduct of drivers.
To help drivers adapt themselves to motorway conditions, the authorities published the Motorway Code, later incorporated in the Highway Code, setting out special rules of conduct for safety at motorway speeds. These rules are sound common sense. Good drivers, in fact, have always observed most of them on any fast road. But even so, it's essential to study them carefully before driving on the motorway for the first time.
Public information films were produced, explaining the do's and don'ts of motorway driving.
In peril, and all because one driver forgot one simple rule. Before pulling out to overtake on the motorway, see that the road behind you is clear. They were lucky. You might not be.
How far's the next slip road?
I believe the sign said 8 miles.
8 miles?
This driver is just about to commit one of the deadly sins of the motorway.
John, what are you going to do?
I'm turning back down the other road.
You can't. We must go on.
What, and add another 16 miles? Not likely. We're late already.
Please.
Oh, don't worry. There's nothing to it.
I'm getting out. You can leave me here. I think you're mad. We shall will be killed.
Oh, all right, if you're going to make such a fuss, but I still think it would have been the best thing to do.
Watch out, too, for the specially designed road signs. A mile ahead of your turn-off point, you'll see a warning sign.
The motorway offered a design opportunity.
And the third at the point of exit.
Road signs in Britain were chaotic and came in different sizes, symbols, colours and shapes. The result was frustration and confusion. When the motorways were still in the planning phase, the government had appointed a committee to investigate the issue of new signage.
They thought, perhaps we might need the help of a designer. So that was quite a very new thing for somebody actually, for a committee, a government committee, to employ a consultant designer.
How do they differ from present motor signs? We've used a mixture of block letters and small letters for greater legibility.
Jock Kinnear and Margaret Calvert were charged with developing a new signage system for Britain's motorways. They realised that the absolute essence of an efficient motorway signage system was clarity. The signs had to be easy to read, instantly recognisable to motorists. Motorists had to understand what they were saying and it had to convey essential information to them. But motorists really didn't need to waste time thinking.
The basic unit, obviously, is the typeface. And from that, you build out.
So in order to achieve this simplicity, they had to do some very complicated work behind the scenes. So they thought through every single aspect of the way in which those signs would be read.
The lettering always stayed the same, and you read the symbol first, and then you picked out the lettering, and then you got the sense of what the message was, and the route numbers. So basically, it's very simple, and the colours.
And we've also put white letters on a blue background for the same reason.
I remember the formula that I used was ultramarine plus azure blue plus zinc white, designer's colours.
We were amazed at the size of them. It staggered us. We just couldn't comprehend that you need a road sign as big as we were making them. But of course, you're travelling at 70 miles an hour and you want to pick up the directions early, so they're logical and they're correct, but we were surprised.
They are beautifully elegant. They're like works of art in their own right, but they're also completely, utterly functional. And that is why today, over 40 years later, that signage hasn't changed. It doesn't need to change. Perfect typography is perfect typography.
When you're driving along a motorway or a British road, thanks to Jock Kinnear and Margaret Calvert, you never have to think about the signs you're looking at.
Keep it simple, and it's easier to read and remember, and it looks good in its own right in the landscape.
The Kinnear-Calvert partnership went on to redesign all of the road signs in Britain. The next motorway to be completed was the M1. At just 74 miles, it was the first long-distance motorway in Britain. It stretched from St Albans in Hertfordshire to Dunchurch in Warwickshire. The M1 was opened on the 2nd of November 1959 by Ernest Marples, the Transport Minister for Macmillan's Tory government.
It is in keeping with the bold, exciting and scientific age in which we live.
It's interesting, the first real motorway in Britain, the M1, which opened in November 1959, was basically a straight line. I mean, it's like a long concrete strip, just cutting its way through the landscape, paying virtually no reference to topography. I mean, who cares about hills, rivers, vales, valleys? Just build as straight as you can. That was how motorways were conceived. Straight line, very fast, no messing around. And I suppose, as a reflection of that, the actual design, the engineering, and the minimalist architecture around it in terms of structures, bridges principally, were just brutally functional.
Highly efficient organisation on a vast scale, both played a vital part.
The building of the 55-mile northbound section was split into 4 contracts.
The £16 million contract...
John Lang & Sons Limited secured them all, but had just 19 months to complete them.
Headquarters at Newport Pagnell.
The consulting engineers were Sir Owen Williams and Partners. Sir Owen had been knighted for his design of the original Wembley Stadium and was a well-known public figure.
Sir Owen, this is something almost revolutionary in this country in the way of road construction, isn't it?
I think I can say that there is no other greater effort being made in the world comparable to this.
Well, Sir Owen was a
a very forceful character. He was a great man to work with because he was a wonderful fund of anecdotes because of all the people he'd met during his career. But he'd established this reputation as a very prominent engineer-architect.
48 surveyors and engineers were engaged in calculating and setting out the centre line of the motorway.
I forget now how many people there were, landowners and people who were involved in that, but there must have been about 300 odd. And he went to see them all, personally, so that, you know, the objections to the road were minimal because he'd been to see people, and of course at the time, building a motorway and trying to come to terms with the sort of new motorway age was something that people were all in favour of. I thought it was great.
To prepare an accurate construction programme...
In all, only 5 houses and 3 bungalows were demolished to make way for the M1. $20 million tons of rock, chalk and earth had to be excavated to clear the land. The site was so vast that the latest technology was used to survey it.
Keeping track of what's happening can best be done from the air. By helicopter, checks can be made all along the route in a matter of hours. "5,000 men were employed to work on the project, and mobile canteens were built every 2.5 miles to cater for them. In all, 183 bridges were built on the M1. On average, one was completed every 3 days.
The scene, I mean, you've got to imagine the scene. It's hard to believe that great construction programme. I mean, it's heroic in scale, Roman in scale, Victorian in scale. The M1 was built at a rate of 1 mile every 8 days. I mean, today, when we find it very difficult to build an Olympics or to build a Wembley Stadium, try and imagine what that means. Just really think, 1 mile every 8 days, completed. It's really, really fast. It's the speed the Chinese work today in rebuilding Shanghai or Beijing. That's what the Brits could do at the time.
Cuttings, embankments, bridges, 2-level junctions, all were taking shape in the scarred earth.
I could name and remember very clearly, particular, I suppose, the muck shifting foreman or the actual agent, the sub-agent on muck shifting, because these were characters of their own. They hired and bought in enormous fleets of often great big motor scrapers, things capable of carrying 40 metres of muck at one particular time from one place to another. These guys had a life and a way, you know, and a rule that nobody got in their way because these machines were enormous.
One machine doing the work of up to 1,000 men, and each one costing about as much as a pick and shovel man might earn in a long working lifetime. So the earth-moving navvy of today is first and foremost a machine man, a driver. A driver as skilled in his way as the driver of a track racing car.
And had these big outlets like cleaning the rest of the ground to get it level, you know, and so it's just like a sand dune. These big machines flying up and down.
How long did it take you to get to know how this machine reacts to all these controls?
Well, I'm quite a while now working at machineries for Wimpy's. I'm 7 years driving this type of machine.
Men of all colours and creeds from all over the Commonwealth are helping to build this great new motorway.
The construction of the M1 was really, I suppose, a 1950s version of the building of the railways 120 years before. The men that built them were essentially navvies.
I've navvied here in Scotland, I've navvied in the south.
The term navvy is derived from the inland navigators who built the canal system in Britain in the 18th and 19th centuries. Mostly Irishmen, navvy became the term used to describe all manual labourers. Between 1951 and 1961, over 500,000 Irishmen came to Britain to work in the building and construction industry.
A bold navvy man, me boys, a bold navvy man. I've done me graft and stuck it like a bold navvy man.
The majority of those would have left school before the age of 15 because there was no free secondary education. They were coming from a predominantly rural background, disadvantaged, unskilled, uneducated, but well used to hard graft, out of doors, very tough, very determined people, and they were a godsend to the construction industry in Britain.
The only thing I knew then was labouring.
Then I got driving a machine and driving cranes and bulldozers and all sorts of machinery, tower cranes, all that, and that set me up for good or better, travelling up and down the country.
It was always gone out to a job to go with somebody who was working there. That was your reference, you know, and that's how you got on. You hadn't any details or anything, just come in tomorrow, like, you know.
They were used to hardship. They were used to working out of doors. It was sink or swim. They were determined that they would succeed. There was no going back. So they had that dogged determination, that stamina, that staying power. Paddy was used to being down the trench, was quite happy to get in there and make good money at it because he had the hours, he could put in the overtime. And where there's muck, there's brass.
The work goes on day and night in all weathers, rain or shine. Here at Newport Pagnell, the halfway house, the work is nearing completion. Enormous concrete mixers are at it 24 hours a day.
That was hard, very hard work. Really hard work. They'd be there digging, pick and shovel. And they earned the money. Every penny that was earned there was earned in the hard way for labour, in my opinion.
As each section of motorway was completed, the site moved on and the workforce needed to move with it. Many of the workers stayed in local farms or bed and breakfasts.
There are landladies who have a taste for looking after the kind of men who do real men's work, men with hair on their chests and dried concrete on their boots, and who do, by a
I remember going into one digs, and I thought, beautiful, beautiful. They said, I went upstairs to bed and the sheets were black. And I said, am I in the right room here? She says, yeah. And I said, I'm sorry, look. And she says, anything is good enough for motorway workers.
For the motorway men who wanted to keep their families with them, mobile caravan sites were set up along the route. It's estimated that as much as half the workforce on the M1 were Irish. There were so many that 2 Catholic chaplains were sent from Ireland to administer to them on site.
All the Catholics would gather around. If it was a nice day, he'd be on the open air, just have a table in front of him and he'd say mass, like, you know, and give out communion and everything. They were great that way. Notice would go up on the canteen, or you'd get to know it by word of mouth. Might be 10:30 or 11 o'clock, but it didn't make any difference. As long as he was finished for opening time of the pub. It was amazing.
Oh, you got your wages, like, you queued up, there was a wages office, like, a pigeonhole that paid you out, like, there was no problem that way, you see. That was all done on the site, that was okay.
We went to dinner hours, we went right through.
You only live for payday. The other days were dead days, you know, and they didn't give us wages as such, they gave us beer tokens, you know. Well, that's all we done with them, like, you know. Everything was how much beer you can get with it. If I buy this week, how much would I have for a drink?
Wages were good, but working so far from home in an itinerant culture was to cost many of the navvies dearly.
We were just displaced people. Just displaced people, you know. I used to look at older people in me and I thought, is this going to be the end product?
They've washed down muds with pints and quarts of beer. And now we're on the road again with McAlpine's Fusiliers.
The final touches were being added to the first long-distance motorway in the country. The M1 was finished, on time and on budget, at a cost of £16.5 million.
The M1 was opened in almost an apocalyptic atmosphere, that there was a feeling that this road was going to solve Britain's transport problems. I mean, that's rather oversimplified, but people did feel that, and there was an enormous amount of excitement about it.
110 miles of carriageway, 200 bridges and culverts, all in 19 months. Impossible, they said.
This was the beginning of a new era.
They'll never do it. But they did, because we're driving along it now at 70 miles an hour.
It was seen as a glimpse into the future when we would have a network of these and most people would be able to make most of the length of their journeys on these very high quality roads.
No crossroads, 2 level junctions with...
And it was a time of great optimism. The general view was extremely positive. It was all very exciting.
A tremendous undertaking, triumphantly fulfilled.
We were invited to the opening of the M1, and I can remember that vividly. It was a beautiful sunny summer day, and we were told where we would be meeting for someone to cut the ribbon or whatever and make the speech. And I remember driving along, and it was all this brown soil. And these signs were for real. These were the real beautiful, I thought, white on blue signs with our lettering and everything. And in the sun and against the earthiness of the banks, it was just very surreal. And nobody else on the motorway. So we went on and on and on and on. And in the end, we came to the end. There was no more motorway. And we somehow missed the junction or wherever the ceremony was going to happen. So we didn't go to it in the end. We missed it.
All our directors were invited to go to the opening, and we had passes to go down the motorway, all the way down 50 miles down the motorway to get to the opening. And our directors went in the Rolls Royce, company Rolls Royce, and it blew up like a tea kettle, travelling at 50, 60 mile an hour. Even Rolls Royces in that day and age weren't designed for motorway speeds.
Britain's first motorway is proving a big attraction for drivers at the weekend. It's the novelty of a high-speed run, I suppose. And just as people once went to Croydon to see aeroplanes fly, so now M1 attracts the curious. They watch from bridges, and they travel in coaches on sightseeing jaunts.
Sundays were often the busiest days on the motorway. The Sunday afternoon family drive was very popular at this time, and many families would go out and drive along the motorway just to kind of experience it. The motorway became a destination in itself, a tourist site, because it was so unique and so special.
A small ceremony, but a big event. And traffic was soon taking this opportunity of trying out a new experience in British road travel. A new experience, yes, but of course not every car is in condition for sustained high speed.
Try and imagine what it would be like. You're at the wheel of your family Morris Oxford, which is a top speed of about 50 miles an hour realistically. You're wobbling along down Sunday Road, you come to a roundabout, press heavily on the brakes, down in the old gearbox, crunch, crunch, and then turn on to this shimmering new road, this great yellow brick road leading to a kind of New Jerusalem.
The M1, for example, stretching for 75 miles north from London.
And on goes your car. It sounds totally different. Off the tarmac, onto concrete, the wheels, instead of going, start to go sound. It's an incredibly noisy experience. The car's wandering around this whole car with the wind blowing across the side of the motorway. I remember the first motorway totally exposed.
On these new wide roads, one gets no sensation of speed. And even at 75 miles an hour, you might well be cruising.
Then, of course, the temperature gauge would go up on the car, the oil pressure, of course, would drop, and the thing would... and a 60 mile an hour sprint would turn into a 10 mile an hour crawl and the thing would break down.
Some drivers don't seem to grasp the fact that a car must be in first-class trim if it's going to be driven non-stop for miles at top speed or thereabouts. Engines and tyres must be in condition to take such a test.
So the average car was clunky, solid, old. Cars looked almost mock Tudor in their design, and they were like mock Tudor houses on wheels, I suppose. They weren't designed for motorways.
And I must say I drove up it very carefully because I had heard tales that engines would overheat if you flogged it too hard. So I remember driving, once we drove all the length of the M1 at 45 miles an hour, which is sort of unbelievable now.
With no legal speed limit, the new 74-mile motorway would push many cars to the limit. The RAC and the AA had to make special provisions.
Mr. Ryan, has this new motorway given you any new problems?
No, we don't think so. We regard this new motorway as yet another important main road. We really don't know what's going to happen.
The first night I was on the motorway, I had 8 cars, all the same make and all the same trouble, and everyone had got his big ends gone. Big ends didn't go on that car. It's a car that lasted forever, and this is the old Hillman Minx. I mean, you get 4 or 5, 6 a day. I mean, all the garages were changing engines as fast as they could go.
I think your big ends are definitely gone.
There are telephones along the motorway, but in any case, help shouldn't be long in coming. Here's an AA mobile radio control centre. A patrol van is soon on the way to the breakdown.
Overheating. About 25% of all the cars, which are over 5-year-old, have got block radiators. Half the cars hadn't got temperature gauges, and they just boil up. All of a sudden they'd be going along and knock, 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 knock. Either the big end's gone or the piston's gone. The pistons used to melt. You always knew what it was before you got there, because as you were driving up the motorway, you'd suddenly see a big patch of oil for about 100 yards on the road. And it just sort of, as he pulled in, so the oil would still be dripping, you know, you think, oh, another one gone. I'll go and give him the good news. We did 13,500 jobs, breakdowns, in the first year the motorway was opened. And 13,000 is a lot of breakdowns.
Aerial patrols will provide an even speedier method of spotting the motorist in trouble. General information about road conditions and any hold-ups can be radioed to AA headquarters in London. 30 traffic advisors man this operations room at Fainham House. For motorists from the north, for example, this map shows how they may take advantage of the motorway to get to any point in the southeast.
As for the motorway itself, there's been a spot of bother with the so-called hard shoulder at the side of the road. The hard shoulder seems to be soft, in places at any rate. Stop on it and you may get bogged down.
I went on there, of course we had highly polished boots, and when I got home you couldn't see my boots, so my trousers were sort of reddish brown colour. And of course I just stepped out the car, out the Land Rover, you see, straight into the hard shoulder, and down I went.
Many breakdowns were reported on the first day, but there are excellent facilities to deal with these. And with accidents. And on the subject of accidents, Mr. Marples had a word of warning to all high-speed motorists.
For on this magnificent road, the speed which can easily be reached is so great that senses may be numbed and judgment warped.
We were having a lot of accidents. We had no crash barriers at first, and so what we did have were these head-on collisions, even if they were doing 70 miles an hour, head-on at 140 miles an hour. Now, nobody realised that this was a dangerous thing to put a piece of grass with a bit of gravel. It was very good for us, police officers, because if we saw a car that we wanted to stop going the other way, we could swing round, as we did do on the grass verge. We would spiral round and fly the other way without thinking about it.
If you overshoot the turning point, don't try to do this. Reversing and turning on the motorway is an offence which could cost you £20 in a magistrate's court. If you miss your turning, you must continue along the motorway to the next exit.
Officially, you drove right round to the next junction and went back up again. If it was quiet, you went across Centre Reservation. And funny enough, the police did the same thing, ambulance did the same thing, the AA and the RAC, even the garages did it.
Visitor to Blackbush Airport was Transport Minister Ernest Marples, seeking, as always, more safety on the roads. He was there to see a car driven at 60 miles an hour against a new type fence, flexible but with a 22-ton braking strain, specially designed for motorways.
A well-designed barrier that's meant to bring your speed down and redirect you safely onto your own carriageway. Better to hit that than to hit someone coming the opposite way at 70 miles an hour.
The driver was unhurt and damage to the car was superficial.
In 1962, Ernest Marples announced the government's plan to complete 1,000 miles of motorway. A year later, he commissioned a report into the profitability of British railways, written by Dr. Richard Beeching.
Dr. Beeching, do you personally believe that the government has no real alternative but to accept your plan?
I think that these proposals are in the long-term interests of railwaymen. I think they'll go along with us.
Beeching was, I suppose, the first executive businessman to put in charge of the railways. He was an ICI executive.
Directed towards making the railways do those things that they can do best.
But he came in with this brief to slash them up, to axe them. There's a famous phrase, the Beeching axe.
Today's report will shape the future of the system. More than 2,000 stations will be closed. The most dramatic effects are in Scotland. Remote areas of the Highlands will lose their services. Wales takes a body blow as well. Holiday resorts in the West Country share the fate of many market towns. No station, no passenger trains. In the northeast, little more than the main north-south links will remain.
These carriages, which have carried generations of holidaymakers and people going to the office, have come to the end of the line. Anything that can be used again economically is salvaged, but there is nothing much that can be done with old woodwork except this.
It meant the abandonment of enormous assets, which were the creation of the previous century. And now we very much wish we hadn't done it.
So Beeching was a believer that the railways were essentially old-fashioned. He was going to modernise them, but it also meant, in a way, undermining them and giving traffic to the motorways.
Motorways may have been the fastest way to travel, but they were still at the mercy of the British weather.
And then we just got here now.
How far have you come?
About 5 miles.
That's taken you over 3 hours.
Yes, yeah, close on that.
How does this compare with other fogs that you've driven in?
Oh, this is the worst. This is the worst I've had. Definitely the worst. Yeah.
Fog was much more common in the mid-1960s than nowadays because of industrial air pollution and coal fires in houses and so on. In particular, you're afraid to go too slowly in case you get hit from behind. And then, of course, you find you hit something in front. And so you got these multi-vehicle pileups, which were a new phenomenon.
There's cars coming through the fog, 50, 60 miles an hour. I mean, they couldn't see where, you couldn't see across 3 lanes, so you could just imagine what it, they were just hurtling, and you hear it go, meow, bump, meow, bump.
And this would happen on a regular basis, 40 or 50 cars all smashed into one another. Somebody devised a wonderful scheme where we had 2 spotlights, orange spotlights, on a big black pole. Connected, because there was no electricity, connected to a car battery in a box beneath it. These were every mile, so that when the fog arrived, the police car on that section could switch a switch and switch these 2 flashing lights on. And then people without a car battery would think, there's a lot of car batteries on the motorway. So we would then come to these signs in an emergency, perhaps they hadn't been on for 3 weeks, batteries all gone.
Again, electronics come to man's aid and save time and effort. Motorway police have been armed with ray guns. They're harmless except for fog warning lights.
We were a bit like cowboys then. We couldn't wait for the headquarters to say, can you switch all the fog signs on? Oh, get my gun out and away we go.
A motorway cop shows how good a marksman he is on the move with the new Space Age lamplighter. Ready, aim, fire. Good shot.
But we were even better than that. We got really good at it, because if you could get this one on and swing round, you could get the one on the other carriageway in one fell swoop, and it was quite, I got them all on this time, and policemen go, yes, I got the lot, and if somebody missed one, oh, and you had to reverse all the way back, you know, oh, you get him, swap over and I'll put the lights on.
Good shot.
Along with radar guns, the motorway police had faster cars than their colleagues on the A roads.
It's what you might call light work.
We had the Mark II Jaguar when I first went on the motorway. Then we altered to the Jaguar XJ6, That was an improvement. When they were being made, the factory knew which ones were ours. And we only knew that they knew which were our cars when we came to cut the headlining in the car to put the police signs on the top. And then we would find written in the top, all coppers are bastards.
With no speed limit and no legal requirement to wear seatbelts, motorways became the scene of some of the most horrendous accidents. In 1966, Barbara Castle, the new Labour Secretary for Transport, introduced a preliminary speed limit of 70 miles per hour.
But the British motorist has got fed up with being pushed around by successive governments.
But there were still those that resisted it.
Speed limits and parking restrictions.
You're here to protest, are you?
Yes, we are.
Why?
Well, because I think it's stupid.
I drive about 24,000 miles and a lot on motorways, and it's quite ridiculous if you're expected to sort of dawdle along at 70 miles an hour.
How fast have you been in your car?
I've had it up to about 115.
If you examine the accidents, you find that speed is a terribly important, terribly is the word, important element in the causation of road accidents. And here were fast roads built for the purpose, safer, but speed can be too great for them. So don't have it. For safety's sake, Barbara Castle, what does she think of? People, safety. Yes, right.
The main thing that I remember about Barbara Castle was the opening of the next length of the London-Yorkshire motorway when she was the Minister of Transport. And this was at the time when she was forefronting the seatbelt campaign. And I suppose at some expense we had hired a Rolls-Royce for her to drive along the motorway when it was opened. And she wouldn't get in it because it hadn't got seatbelts in the back. So she wouldn't travel in this expensively hired Rolls-Royce.
By 1968, seatbelts, breathalyzers and the 70-mile-per-hour speed limit had become law. The 1,000-mile motorway plan continued, with one of the most ambitious and adventurous schemes yet, to build the highest motorway in Britain. While the M1 took just 19 months to complete, the 7-mile Pennine section of the M62 would take nearly 7 years.
The M62 is the great sort of Trans-Pennine motorway, and it is a truly magnificent achievement. Now that's very rare in Britain, to have a motorway which is quite mountainous in British terms, and a motorway, of course, where you get tremendously foul weather.
Originally a packhorse route, the A62 was the only road across the Pennines connecting Yorkshire and Lancashire. By the early 1960s, it was gridlocked with lorries, and trade was being severely affected. In the winter months, vehicles could be trapped under 12-foot snowdrifts, and sections of the route closed for up to 4 months at a time.
The purpose of the design of the M62, or the basic remit, was to ensure that it was going to be kept open all the time and not be closed to snow. In other words, they wanted a motorway that was going to be kept open for 7 days a week, 52 weeks of the year, and never closed to traffic.
The Pennine section was to be by far the biggest challenge. Climbing to a height of 1,200 feet, it would mean blasting through rock to create a dam. The engineers would then have to build the largest single-span bridge in Europe, while the planned route for the motorway lay across a peat bog.
It's not possible to build a motorway over a peat bog because it'll not support anything. And bearing in mind it's such a high moisture content, it's better to go through it in a boat, actually. And the contractor actually lost a series of machines in the peat. OK, they were recovered eventually, but it presented an enormous problem.
The only way to start building on the bog was to remove the peat.
How to get the peat out? The only answer was to work with a large face shovel, using the underlying...
All 11.75 million cubic yards of it.
40-ton dump trucks.
The only machine that can actually traverse it was the muskeg tractor.
This muskeg tracked vehicle was light enough to cope with the soft, spongy ground and steep-sided clouds.
The man put in charge of this challenging project was 28-year-old Geoffrey Hunter. He made regular appearances in many of the films that were made about the motorway.
This job is different. The whole geography is against us. The weather conditions are against us. They're extremely adverse.
The Pennine weather was so harsh that few people lived there. Although only half a dozen people lived on the planned motorway route, it was to have a huge impact on their lives.
Any project as big as this is bound to upset the lives.
One house was to become almost as famous as the motorway itself.
Here, the carriageways were planned to divide.
It's a shame, really, because there used to be a myth around for many years after the motorway being constructed that the farmer living in the house wouldn't move and refused to move, and therefore we divided the carriageways and put it round it. And that, in essence, sadly, is not true.
In fact, the motorway was built around the farmhouse because the land on which it was standing was unstable and had to be shored up. It was cheaper to build 2 roads around it. The Wild family were living there at the time.
You think of big diggers and trucks and people everywhere, do you? Running past your window. They come on with the ukes, are they? The big wagons full of stone, and every so often there'd be a bang and the quarry would go boom. They frighten you to death. Yeah, you never knew when they were going to be blasting.
It must have been very difficult for the occupant, Mrs. Wild, at the time. The only time I ever met her was because of complaints of dust, and I could understand that problem.
The haul roads, pounded by heavy vehicles, soon dissolved into fine dust that choked men and machines and reduced visibility to nil.
You could not hang your washing out because they worked from 8 in the morning until 8 in the evening, 7 days a week.
It caused collisions and delays, and complaints from farmers some distance away that their crops were being smothered.
It was pointless cleaning the house because it was just absolutely covered in dust. So I used to have to start cleaning the house at 8 o'clock at night when they stopped.
We actually watered the formation to keep the dust down and to make certain that she and her family and everybody else could live there.
The M62 was national news. Work went on 7 days a week, and the site was inundated with visitors. Tourists came by the coachload on Sunday afternoons to watch as 7 million cubic yards of rock was excavated to create the Scamandon Dam. Running on top of it, a 200-foot-high motorway embankment was being constructed. The original plan for the motorway cut across the ancient route of the Pennine Way and would have meant diverting walkers. But ramblers, including the Transport Secretary Mr. Marples, had objected. So a special footbridge was built across the motorway, allowing the walkers to continue their journey. Across Steenhill Cutting, the largest single-span bridge in Europe was being constructed. Covered in 70 miles of scaffolding to protect it from wind speeds of up to 110 miles per hour. In the Pennine winter, it was able to withhold the weight of 1,100 tons of ice.
Nobody appreciates just how big and how massive that structure is, because it's dwarfed by the vastness of the landscape around it. It looks just a small bridge spanning over a motorway in the middle of a cut-in. The cut-in's sufficiently wide enough to absorb the whole of the new Wembley Stadium. Put it in the middle of it, you wouldn't see it, because everything around it is lost in the horizon behind it. The climate was probably the most atrocious thing that we had to cope with. The engineering problems and considerations one can make decisions on. One can't control the climate. Now, I'm an old man now, and it's 40-odd years since I took part in this contract. But the climatic conditions were the thing, probably, that are so deeply imprinted on my mind that man and machine had to endure, fighting the climate constantly.
This is also the only place in the world where it'll actually rain if you can find at Trouser Lakes. It's very simple, actually, to explain this. The wind comes down these valleys very quickly indeed. Rain driven in its path, it actually blows it uphill.
It's terribly frightening when it actually occurs to you.
And it wasn't only driving rain and wind at the time, it was dramatic drops in temperature. It was working in constant cloud.
And when it comes down, it's accompanied by a dramatic...
It was a matter of survival.
Exposure can set in. Men then, and machinery, begin to suffer.
Oh, the conditions were terrible. The conditions were really bad, even for me in the machine. When you went in there in the morning, you were cold. Next thing you'd look around and, geez, you couldn't see nothing. And the only thing you could do then is stop. And somebody would come and rescue you, and it was very frightening sort of work. By just when it rained there, it rained. It was like something like monsoons, like, you know. It'd come down, it'd start off like that, and the next thing, you'd be shivering in the cab. You'd be saying, well, geez, I hope it doesn't come in here. Oh, yes.
There were days on end when you couldn't work. And you had to either sit in the cabs or in the rest huts, waiting for the rain to ease off. They just had to sit there. And literally, they ate mud, walked in mud, sat in mud, and were aware of mud. And there was mud in the sandwiches. Whenever possible, because of these conditions, work was extended sometimes to 24 hours a day. If we could work round the clock under floodlights, we did, and had to.
Day, dusk, sometimes clean through the night and round to another day. Keep going while the weather's with you, 'cause
You didn't have very good lighting. You just had a few lights on the jib of the crane, and sometimes you wouldn't be able to see a lot, but you'd manage it. And that might be going on at 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning. And it took a lot of skill on the driver's part, and it took a lot of skill on the banksman's part. There was a banksman on top directing you in, like, you know. Our jobs was concentration more than anything else. You know, when you were driving the crane, you had to concentrate, or you could kill somebody. Touch wood, I've never had an accident.
They had to give up work, I don't know, the second winter, I think, because of the weather conditions. Everything was bogged down, they couldn't move a thing. And I think they finished for 3 months. And then they came back with a vengeance. And it was like bedlam. But there again, you got used to it again.
On October the 14th, 1971, in glorious weather, the project was honoured by a visit from Her Majesty the Queen.
With the opening of the Scammerdon Dam, the Pennine section of the M62 was finally complete.
The overall length of this Pennine contract was just short of 7 miles, and it took £7 million to build, which is literally £1 million a mile. And now today, you can traverse it in 7 minutes. And it's ironic to think that people that go across it now never sort of really can think or envisage what actually happened in those days some 45 years ago.
Man's great ingenuity and willingness to accept such enormous challenges has brought to a successful end this Pennine project.
A mile of motorway a week had been opened between 1960 and 1970. The next challenge was to start joining some of them up. "15 years in the planning and construction, Gravelly Hill Interchange, or Spaghetti Junction as it's better known, would be different to anything that had gone before it in the history of British motorway construction. Across 5 different levels raised on 600 reinforced concrete columns, this was to be the link between the M1, the M5 and the M6. Crammed onto a 30-acre site, it needed to be choreographed around both the existing industry and the local community.
And of course when it started,
the mess was dreadful.
Mayhem, you know
Absolutely
what I mean? You can
awful.
imagine.
Oh, the
He was
dirt.
a carpenter.
The kids came in with the dirt, and, you know, you pushed your pram through it, and if it was a wet day, you still had to push it back into the hall because you couldn't leave it outside, and it was just a nightmare. The dirt was just a nightmare.
Well, the first time I think we heard was the next door neighbour, and he said to us, "Do you know there's a motorway coming here?" So we just thought, well, we'll wait and see what happens, you know. So then
By
the
that time
motorway
it was
came.
too late.
Yeah.
We were trapped.
175,000 cubic yards.
The engineers had to elevate 13.5 miles of motorway to accommodate 2 railway lines, 3 canals, and 2 rivers.
Building a viaduct of this length needed careful planning and design.
There was a great canal system in Birmingham, and we had to provide a column arrangement so that you could still tow a barge with a horse. I nearly went mad when they said to me, but anyway, we had to do that to rearrange the column so that they could get their horse round there. It was an interesting job, certainly.
You can see why they call it Spaghetti Junction, though the engineers point out that unlike a plate of spaghetti, it stands up and it's highly planned.
Spaghetti Junction is anything but a formless lump. It required a great deal of engineering, planning and design before its final shape was achieved. But yes, it is, I think, a remarkable achievement.
I think it was a clever thing.
Yeah.
I think it's been quite a clever thing for the people that it hasn't affected. But it's not a pleasant thing to live by. I think the engineers that built it should come and live here for at least a month with all the windows propped open.
Just 14 years after the Preston bypass was opened, Spaghetti Junction was completed.
Just follow the signs.
It was opened in November 1972 by Peter Walker, the Environment Secretary for Edward Heath's Tory government.
This is perhaps the most exciting day in the history of the road system in this country.
The job fell to him because the departments responsible for transport, housing and local government had been combined, a sign of the changing attitudes to motorways and their impact on the environment.
And it is, I may say so, a triumph for motorway engineering. Perhaps more important, an illustration of how motorways can improve environments.
Thank you very slowly, Minister.
Okay. I declare this motorway open.
By 1972, 1,000 miles of motorway had been built in Britain, and another 1,000 was expected. From the first 8 miles of the Preston bypass to the engineering feats of Spaghetti Junction, Britain's love affair with the motorway had truly begun. Next time, we look at how the motorway changed our lives and where it's taken us.
And the second part of The Secret Life of the Motorway is here on BBC4 tomorrow night at 10:25. Coming up next this evening, we're off on an Aussie walkabout with Ray Mears.